Today we have an insane story about someone who was kicked out of church by the priest for doing what he was told. We'll talk more on that story, but first. Manager tried throwing me under the bus, so I showed everyone her incompetence. I recently resigned from a toxic workplace as a data analyst at a startup. It was promising at the start, but not long after I noticed many red flags, including the fact that my manager had absolutely no data analysis or management experience prior to being promoted. How can you manage analysts without knowing basic Excel functions? I ignored those red flags and trusted her leadership because I liked the company's goals. Little did I know this would be the worst decision ever. I basically did all the work for the team for the whole year I was there. When I ran the numbers for reporting and analysis of team performance, she always asked me to dumb it down so she can present it to high-level management. I thought everything was going well because I only got good feedback from her and the rest of the team. About a month ago, a coworker who I don't get along with made a complaint about me which was absolutely untrue. Manager believed it without investigating and all of a sudden I was placed on a PIP. She spouted all types of lies to HR, and when I refuted those claims with written evidence, they doubled down and started gaslighting me. You're just too negative. I refused to sign and was threatened with termination, so I complied and started building a case against them. I knew she was doing the PIP to terminate me as she looked for internal candidates to replace me in secret because she was dumb enough to set the meeting up beside me. Once I signed my contract for a new job, I did basically forget all and started working from home. Before my resignation, she asked me to do some reporting for her, so I ran the numbers and sent her the raw data, told her where the files were located and that she can analyze the data and make the presentation herself. Since she's the data analyst manager, she should know how to do it. She tried reporting me for that but ultimately backfired because they asked her if the work that I did was actually wrong, and was forced to admit she didn't know what she was looking at. Everything else in the team was questioned and I believe they are now being audited by an external investigator. Credibility destroyed. I'm now working for a manager who is competent and has clear goals for the team, but that was a hell of a ride. Small win against toxic management, but a win is a win. I got kicked out of a Catholic church by the priest himself for doing what I was told to do. So, a bit of context, I live in Mexico and we practice Catholicism. For those who didn't know, we have these rituals called La Primera Comunión, First Communion, and La Confirmación, Confirmation, which every Catholic has to go through at some point of their lives after several semesters of Catecismo, Bible study. Usually people have to first get the First Communion before being able to do the confirmation. If everything goes well, the person would have completed their confirmation at somewhere around 10 years old. The only problem is, I was around 14 years old and an atheist. At this age I was just coming out to my family, but it's been a while since my doubts. My family wanted me so badly to do the First Communion and were even pressuring me a bit because I was already way behind. I hadn't had my confirmation due to a lot of moving out and other shenanigans, but I refused. They were rather surprised and started trying to convince me on doing it. After a few months of back and forth they told me that my uncle, the favorite of my uncles, have never been someone else's godfather. Yes, we have a godfather and godmother in every event, and that he wished to be someone's godfather so much. So, I finally accepted, really just to please him. To be honest, I now see that it was just a dirty trick because my uncle took it very lightly, like cool level lightly. Anyway, I'm getting off track. We started preparing everything that I needed for the ceremony: the suit, flowers, a Bible, a place where to hold the event. Between other things, one of those were to confess, so we went to a big historical church on my town. We have lots of historical buildings from the Spanish colonization and they are pretty impressive. My parents told me to go in and confess myself to the priest, so I did. I went in there, I met with the priest and he took me to a back room with 2 chairs. He sat me down and asked me to confess my sins, and I let it out. It went something like this. Mind that this was about 8 years ago and my memory is a bit fuzzy. The priest, with a calm and cordial tone, began, "So, tell me, what's wrong? What have you done?" Which I replied with, "I haven't really done anything. I am just here because my parents told me to." The priest looked a little confused and asked, "So, why would they tell you to come here if you have done nothing? You must have done something?" I again talked and said, "No, not really. You see, I am doing my First Communion soon and I was told that I needed to come here." The priest, now even more confused, asked, "Why are you getting your First Communion this late?" Mind that I look way younger than my age, but it was still way too late for a kid to get the First Communion, which was strange to see around these parts. I spoke, now a bit nervous, "Well, I don't really believe in God," and he cut me off with an somewhat angry shout, "What? You don't believe?" I was allowed to continue as he stared me down with an angry stare. "Well, no, I've doubted for a while, and I don't really believe that there is a God." The priest at this point was red. He looked like he wanted to rip my throat out and then he just went off. "Do you think that this is a game? Huh? How dare you set foot in my church if you don't even believe?" He raises his hand. At the moment I kind of felt that it was an incoming strike, but instead he aggressively pointed away. "Get out, and don't come back until you truly believe." Then I got up and jogged, nervously walked outside the room. and closed the heavy old wooden door on my way out. Then I just kinda chickened outside the church. I was both scared and, how do I put it? No. I can't believe I just did that. That was crazy. Yes, I felt those both things. And I also felt a little bit bad. Anyway, I came back to the car after I switched the look of fear on my face into a fake smile. My parents asked me how was it and I told them, oh, the priest kicked me out. Both of my parents' jaws dropped, their faces went red, with both anger and embarrassment I believe, and they said what? So I repeated yay, he kicked me out. During the confession they asked with anger, what did you say to him? Which I replied with the truth. They knew exactly what I was talking about. We stayed parked while they figured what to do next while scolding me from time to time. After a while they took me to the house of a friend of theirs who was also a priest and told me to go confess again, but this time to leave that stuff untouched. So I went in there. He asked me what did I do. I told him nothing. And he was like, hey, good enough. We sat there for a few minutes talking about something. I think it was cars and sports. Well, he was talking, I was nodding. Then I went back and told my parents that I did it. After that I went to an event filled with 6-year-olds. I got my first communion, a free suit, and the best of it all, the respect of my whole family. Now nobody questions my beliefs and or tries to force me into ceremonies of that nature, not even my grandmother, and she is an extreme believer, so, I'm pretty darn happy with how it went. Though I still feel bad about the priest, I feel like he got caught in between the crossfire. He was just doing his job, I guess. Leave the floor wet? Alright, enjoy your rotten wood. First time posting here because I just remembered this incident. Back in the early 00s my mother worked as a cleaner for a couple places and took me with her to help. One place we worked for was the only real estate place in town. We cleaned up before the people who worked there got in. When I started there it was small and somewhat dirty. Old smelly cubicle partitions in faded brown, off-color walls, ingrained dirt in the linoleum. We cleaned and I literally couldn't tell the difference after we were done, except the mirror in the washroom not having any spots on it and the floor being wet from the fresh mopping. Then the town started becoming a cottage town and it is decided that they will move to a nicer place. Cottagers might find the griminess a little off-putting. New place had a bit more space, brand new blue cubicle partitions, newly painted walls that still smelled the first day I cleaned in there, and a cheap hardwood panel floor. That floor was a bit of a problem. See, before, when we mopped, we would just leave the water to dry on the linoleum. We could do that because we got there at about 6:30 and they opened at 7:30. The place was small enough that it was mopped by around 7 o'clock before we left and would be mostly dry by the time people arrived. If we did the same thing for this cheap wood floor my mother was worried we would have water seep into the cracks between the wood panels and rot them. So a new method for mopping was devised. First I dunk the mop, then wring the mop lightly, mop up, wring the mop again but fully this time, and then mop up as much of the excess water as possible. This new method actually visibly got a lot more water off the floor. By the time we left some of the earlier mopped areas would look mostly dry. Good solution, Mom. Couple weeks into the new place my mother gets contacted by the manager and a new order comes in that we are not to dry the floor. I asked if she explained why we dried it. She had. I found this order a bit baffling at the time and it only occurred to me today the reason why he ordered this. The manager got in earlier than everyone else at about 7:15, so I actually saw him a few rare times when we ran late. The old floor would have still been visibly wet in the old place when he got in. The new floor was now dry when he got in. Ipso facto we must have decided to skip mopping to leave early. Even though I didn't understand at the time that he thought we weren't doing our job I, of course, found this new order stupid. I thought he wants the floors wet when he gets in? Fine. Cue malicious compliance. You see, I did the mopping while my mom cleaned the washroom because I was young strapping lad and she was mom so I did what she said. I now had a standing order from the boss to leave a wet floor and, by gum, it was gonna be sopping. From that day forth not only did I not dry the floor, I now didn't even wring the mop after dunking it. I dipped it in the water and just let water slop off of the mop as I pulled it directly out of the bucket. There was no way this was gonna dry before he got in. Probably not for an hour after he got in either. 2 weeks after I started doing this, lo and behold, the wood paneling is already starting to separate at the seams. Dirt is accumulating between tiles. It proves impossible to remove. I was a bit shocked at the time at how fast that had happened. 4 weeks into the new mopping routine the floor was rotting. Was my mother psychic or what? It was apparently very cheap fiberboard with a paper-thin plastic wood grain pattern on it. I would have guessed a laminate wood grain on top of semi-waterproof fiberboard if you'd asked me 4 weeks ago. The floor now had visible divots and lines where the plastic paper sank into the deteriorating wood underneath. These trapped dirt in them as well. How classy. The floor, not even 2 months after they had moved into the new place, was even worse than the old beat-up linoleum one. At this point I asked my mother if we should start drying the floor, and wouldn't you know it, she had already asked. The answer was no. Leave it wet. Baffling. We cleaned there for another month or so. I barely felt safe walking on the floor as it was a now tripping hazard with warped parts popping up. It was also disintegrating. Splinters of wood would pop off every time I swept. The floor now had the dubious distinction of being the worst floor I had seen in a place that wasn't dilapidated. That's all the time we have. If you would like to hear another insane Reddit story, check out my latest video. With that said, I'll see you next time with more stories.